You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. Do you know what an Oxbow lake is? Exactly what it is. You know where they are. We're going to learn about them and more today with Greg Glotzbecker, the Fisheries Coordinator at MDWFP.
Mississippi Outdoors is sponsored by Entergy Mississippi. Entergy is building a stronger and cleaner grid to power a brighter future and protect our great outdoors for generations to come.
We've got Greg Glotzbecker with us here today, Fisheries Coordinator at MDWFP. Greg, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so I was looking over some of your history and notes, learning a little bit about you before you came, and it's one of those where two things jump out at me. The name and grew up not in Mississippi, but in Ohio.
Yeah, that's true.
Tell me about growing up in Ohio, a little bit of how that led you to Mississippi. I know that's a long path, but take me back to that.
Yeah, so it's been quite a few years, but born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio. Lived there until I was about 22 years old. Went to University of Cincinnati, was a Bearcat for a period of time, but always had an interest in fish and the outdoor and outdoors and nature. And one thing kind of led to another. After school at Cincinnati, had an opportunity to do graduate school down at Tulane University, and was there for a while. Did a master's degree and PhD, and spent a lot of my life on kind of the academic side of fish and research, and kind of slowly found my way over here in more natural resource management. So one thing kind of led to another, and met my wife in New Orleans, and Mississippi was pretty close, so this is where we ended up.
So it's one of those classic tales of from Ohio to the southeastern United States and then just never left. It just became
yeah. So I've been a little bit of a transplant, but officially, I guess I've been living in the South now since 2007. So every now and then, some people give me a little bit of a hard time, but they they kind of accept me now as a transplant. But enjoyed it. Enjoy the people, enjoy the food, the culture. And obviously the fish.
Yeah. So when someone, finds out that you're the, a fisheries coordinator or the fisheries coordinator for MDWFP, do you ever get the question, okay, well, what do you do?
Yeah. So a lot of times when we deal with the public, people kind of ask us, hey, are you a park ranger? They see the truck that says MDWFP, want to know what we do, what our days are like. And say, well, we work in fisheries. We manage the sportfish populations for the state. But to, answer the question, what does a fisheries coordinator do? It's a lot of different things. And that's really one of the things I really enjoy about my position here is that every day is different. So one day I could be, at one of our fish hatcheries helping to, pull bass, or I could be out, talking to a commercial fisherman about carp. That every day is really different, and I really enjoy that.
That phrase you mentioned there, the managing the sportfish population. I mean, that's a huge umbrella that all those things fall under.
It is.
Big job.
Yeah. So you think about, sportfish, most people are probably thinking about bass or crappie or brim, something like that. And, we definitely deal with the fish themselves, but we have to think about the water bodies, the lakes, the rivers, the habitat, the use that, people put on these resources. And, we want to basically keep it so everybody has a good time when they go out and want to fish.
Yeah. Did you grow up fishing in Ohio?
Yeah, a little bit. So, my experience with fishing growing up was kind of more farm pond fishing, bank fishing. We had some friends that had, small lots of land that had probably, half acre, 1 acre ponds, and we would go out and just, fish for whatever we could catch. It was, bobber and hot dog kind of fishing. We weren't really trying to target any particular species, but we would catch, bluegill and catfish and small bass. And we were really just happy with catching anything, to be honest with you. Also had a grandmother that had a big catfish pond kind of behind the area where she lived. And it was more of kind of a retirement complex, I guess, and that was just chock full of channel cats. And, you about put your hook on a fish every time you threw it out there. But, we had a good time with that. So definitely had some experiences with, sport fishing and things like that with my father and my brother growing up. And, my interest kind of picked up from there.
You wrote a recent piece for the Mississippi Outdoors magazine about the Oxbow Lakes.
Yeah.
And that'd be the Mississippi River Oxbow Lakes, I assume, right?
Correct. Yeah. So here in Mississippi, we have, kind of a unique set of resources, which are these Oxbow lakes that are associated with kind of the delta portion of our state. And for those of you who don't know really what an oxbow is, it's really just kind of an old segment of river channel that kind of has become cut off through processes of erosion, sedimentation, and they kind of form these more lake-like environments, which are often really rich in, sport fish populations, that historically have had a lot of history with the state. Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to throw some real, elementary questions at you about, so Oxbow Lakes, they're cut off from the river at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Are they huge bodies of the water? Are Oxbow Lakes really small? Do they vary in size?
Yeah. So they vary in size. I would say here in Mississippi, they probably are on the average of 100 to maybe 300 acres in some cases. Some of our water bodies are larger than others. Places like, Lake Washington, Lake Ferguson, those can get up, well over 100 acres in size. You do have some smaller ones, that people are maybe not as familiar with. But they kind of form these more lake-like environments, which are very influenced by the river itself in many cases. Water is kind of king with all of these conversations of, with oxbows and the fisheries out there. So that's a big factor that we, try to track and keep in mind.
So in the overall idea of the river, shifting, changing, the sedimentation and the way it moves and over the course of time and forming these lakes, how often does that happen? Like, I guess how frequent is it that you get a new Oxbow lake that forms? Yeah.
So, it's not a super frequent thing, but we have some oxbows here in Mississippi that are probably in the 50 to 100 year age range. Others are hundreds, if not maybe 1,000, years old. But it takes long periods of time, generally speaking, for these oxbows to form. So as you may imagine, water is always trying to find the lowest place possible as it flows over the surface of the earth. It brings sediment with it, it brings up silt and things like that. And in certain places, it will, cut and erode, the earth and the clay. And other places where the velocity is kind of lower of the water, it will deposit it and eventually kind of cut off these old bends in the rivers and form these oxbows.
What are some of the major challenges when you're managing that fishery and then managing a fish population, game fish population in an oxbow? What are the challenges? Yeah.
So oxbows are really challenging for a variety of different reasons. The biggest factor has to do with, the hydrology, right? So being close to the river, Mississippi River, when that body of water, floods, it affects all of our oxbow lakes. And when we have water, or if we don't have a lot of water, that affects the fisheries, right? So a lot of what we deal with the oxbow lakes has to do with the stage of the Mississippi River. A handful of our oxbows are connected directly to the Mississippi River, right? So think of, like your Lake Ferguson, Washington, Whittington, places like that. They have direct connections to the river. So when the river comes up, the water goes into those oxbows and oftentimes brings living things with it. And also the contrary, if we have periods of drought where there isn't a lot of rainfall for a long time and, the Mississippi River at Vicksburg is at 8 feet, those become stressful times for the fish populations within those lakes.
Yeah. It makes sense too. And again, novice here, but I'm just thinking, the difference between a reservoir or something like, a Bay Springs, that type of body of water versus that oxbow. It's really two totally different animals, isn't it, in those kinds of bodies of water?
Yeah, they're really different. So, we're kind of at the mercy of Mother Nature a lot in this particular case that, if we get a lot of rainfall or if it floods, that can cause certain situations to occur. In the springtime, like right now, we get, a lot of rainfall in Mississippi. We got some good rain over this weekend and today. And as that water comes up, sometimes that can be beneficial and, provides habitat for fish to spawn and for juvenile fish and fry to kind of hide from larger fish trying to, eat them for dinner. But compared to like a reservoir, that water level is really controlled, at a more detailed level. So, there's spillways and floodgates and things of that nature that we can control that water level within those reservoirs. With the oxbows that we have, we really don't have that level of control with the water. A few of our oxbows, they have weirs and things on them where we can manage the water level to some extent. But in many cases, if you get all that water rushing in a short period of time, those lakes become almost inaccessible for anglers.
Yeah. Why are oxbows and their fish populations, why are they important? That may be a fair, it might be an unfair question, but why are they important? Maybe other than I fish at Lake Ferguson or I go to Moon Lake.
Yeah.
Why are they important bodies of water?
Yeah. So our oxbows are really kind of unique ecosystems that we have. And, vast majority of the oxbow lakes that we have across the world, large proportion of them are actually here in kind of the southeastern United States, associated with the lower Mississippi River. But besides just fish, these areas are, really great habitat for a whole host of different living organisms. So you have all types of waterfowl, and you have, mammals and insects, and of course you have the fish that live there as well. But there's probably 50 to 100 different species of freshwater fish that live in and around these oxbows.
Are they? Is it pretty diversified of the types of fishermen, the type of fishing that is done in the oxbows, or is it primarily bass fishing? Is it primarily catfish? Like, what do you see?
We see about 3 or 4 different types of fishermen out there. So I would say the top 2 are bass fishermen and crappie fishermen. Those are probably the 2 big target species that we see. As you probably know, places like Lake Washington, one of the best, crappie fishing lakes that we have in the world, Yeah. We do get a fair number of bass fishermen. There's a lot of, bass anglers, tournament fishermen that fish out there in those lakes. They have a pretty strong history of, doing pretty well out in those areas. There's good fish populations. Besides that, there's a good number of brim fishermen, people looking for bluegill or shellcrackers, things like that. Catfish, people always looking for those as well. So it's pretty diversified in terms of who's out there and what they're looking for.
As you were talking, I was thinking back to that earlier question about the, a fisheries coordinator. What do you do?
Yeah.
I saw, I think it was the report numbers that you and your team compiled. You get all this data from tournament fishermen across the entire state. And you're looking at some pretty clear numbers of average size of big bass that are caught in tournaments.
Sure.
Some lakes averaging more. It was really fascinating. And as you were talking, I was just thinking that deal of managing fisheries, how much information over geographically such a big area you guys are pulling from to manage those fisheries and all of them throughout the year.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to paint it into a picture of a bigger job than it is. It's just a really big job, and you're pulling a lot of data every year.
Yeah. It's a year-round job, whether it's, springtime and we're out doing angler surveys or creel surveys, or in the fall, we're out on, out on our boats doing shocking surveys, trying to sample the fish populations. We're always collecting data every year. We're compiling that data, analyzing it, looking for trends and population structure, size, weights. How long does it take somebody to catch a 5-pound bass? Those are questions that we're interested in. Or, the fishermen are saying that this year the crappie are less abundant than last year. Do we see the same thing in our sampling that the fishermen are seeing? And in many cases we do. But we take all that data and we analyze it. We look at trends over periods of time. So we have, kind of living spreadsheets of data that go back 10, 15, 20 years. And we look at all the ups and downs of these fisheries populations for all of our water bodies, really. So it's a lot of data, a lot of work. And I'm fortunate to have, teams of really good fish biologists that are out in the field collecting a lot of that data, day in, day out.
I think the one, it was a PDF, that report, and it was, bass fishing from tournament data that y'all had collected.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the most recent one, 23, 24.
Yeah.
And that number, how many days it takes to catch a 5-pounder, it jumped out at me. I was looking at the top because I think the number was like 490 something days on average.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, hours.
Might have been hours.
I'm sorry, not days.
Yeah.
490 something hours on average to catch that 5-pounder. And I was trying to do that math. 490, how many times do I need to go? And, but it speaks to, I mean, those opportunities are out there, but you got to put your time in really wherever you are.
Yeah. Everybody's looking for a shortcut, and, with things like, forward facing sonar, live scope, people think there's shortcuts to finding these big fish. And, sometimes you can get lucky, but for most people, even folks that have been fishing their entire lives, how often do you land that, 6, 7, 8 pound bass? Maybe, once every couple months if you're out there every weekend. So
right.
We don't want to paint a false picture of what, fishing sometimes really is like. So
and for those listening, that number, that was fishing tournament data that was collected. How do you get that? Is it that, you contact and reach out to all these regular tournaments that are being conducted and ask for that? They voluntarily give it to you? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's a combination of things. So we kind of put out feelers, and we get in touch with, the folks that run the different tournaments. And many times they're nice enough to give us their tournament reports and, what was the weight of the winning bag and things of that nature. But also sometimes we find data on, social media, Facebook and groups like that, where you'd be surprised, someone's having like a little, fruit jar tournament, right. And we can get some information from there. But we have a really great biologist in our South region, Stan Kreider, who's been doing our, bass tournament reports for quite a number of years. And, he gets his information from a lot of different sources. So, it just kind of depends on the year and I guess, how many tournaments are being held, but, he's always trying to find more data, and sometimes I don't know how he finds so much data, but, it's good to have though. Yeah. It's interesting.
I also, again, as somebody who at one time years ago tried the tournament bass fishing and really had a good time, but didn't win very many tournaments. Yeah. I was looking at the data compiled for that survey, the average first place weight, and how, some bodies of water, throughout the year, the average first place weight might've been 12 or 13 pounds for 5 fish.
Oh yeah.
And then there were others like, I think it was Bogahoma. It was over 20 pounds, 21 pounds was the average winning. And so it spoke to me too. I thought, okay, so what you're finding is certain bodies of water producing bigger fish more often. And I wonder if it's that way every year or if it ebbs and flows.
Yeah. So there's definitely cycles. We see certain lakes that are, kind of hot one year and they kind of cool off another. But we do have certain lakes, around the state that tend to produce, larger fish more consistently than others. One of which, Bogahoma, I think has a top spot right now for, your 5-pound tournament bag. Getting close to, I think, 30 pounds in some cases, or if you look at somewhere like, Pickwick or some places up north, there's some big bass that come out of those areas. Yeah. But then if you look at other places as well, for tournaments, sometimes you may only have, 15, 18, 20 pounds, that wins a tournament. So, it's not like everybody going out every tournament is, catching fish that are over 5, 6 pounds every time. So, yeah.
I'm going to go back to something you mentioned a minute ago. So I was asking you about the 490 hours that you have to put in on average, according to this data, to catch a 5-pounder and how that kind of works.
Yeah.
Has that changed since the advent and the implementation? So many more people have the live sonar, the live view.
Yeah.
Has that duration shortened a little bit?
It has, yeah.
Okay.
So we're finding pretty much across the board, not just for bass, but also crappie, the amount of time that it takes to catch, say, 5-pound bass or a 3-pound crappie. has really been almost cut in half in some cases.
Wow.
So, if you have people out there that, know how to find the fish with that technology, you can really target, large fish. You can follow large fish. And in many cases, you can catch those size fish or the number of fish in, sometimes almost half the amount of time that it would take you through more traditional fishing methods. So
that's interesting. But not surprising.
Not surprising. Yeah. So we don't really see that people are harvesting that many more fish.
Yeah.
Because, we have regulations and limits on how many fish or of a species you can take per day. But the amount of time that it takes to get those fish is becoming less and less.
So those larger fish that I learned from talking to Larry Pugh, right where you're sitting, that means they're older fish.
Correct.
So is there an emphasis on catch and release? Hey, lunker, take the picture, release it, or no?
Well, it depends on where you are.
Okay.
So if you have a particular lake that is known for trophy bass, large bass, maybe 8, 9, 10, 12 pounds, in certain cases, you might want to release, some of those particular fish. But more often than not, we have a lot of lakes that are what we call bass crowded, where we get a lot of kind of smaller bass in the 10 to 14 inch range, and they're all competing for food, and in those situations, bass harvest is actually a desirable thing to maintain that fishery. So, if you go out and, fish somewhere like, Calling Panther or wherever, and, you're catching a lot of little, 12, 14 inch fish, which are, great eating fish, but they're not really a trophy to a lot of folks. We actually encourage people to harvest those fish, take some out, eat them, give them to your neighbor, because that way you reduce the pressure on other fish and allow some of those remaining fish to get, larger, maybe double digits. So,
which speaks to and goes back to the idea of measuring kind of what you have.
Sure.
If can't manage it if you don't measure it. So you're kind of looking and measuring and keeping notes, and the data is what we're getting at, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, we get data from our anglers, we get data from our biologists with our sampling every year. We're going out and, measuring all the fish that we catch. We take their weights. We look at kind of the structure of the population, and that's how we make our recommendations for, limits. Sometimes people think that maybe we just make up or pull out, different ideas of how to manage a fishery, but it's really kind of a calculated thing. We look and see how many fish are out there and the pressure and what size they are, and we'll try to protect certain age classes. We'll put minimum length limits or slot limits on a particular lake, and try to protect some of those fish up to spawning size. And if there's no longer a need for it, then we get rid of it. We pull it off. So probably one of the big misconceptions I think the public might have about Fisheries Bureau or any other kind of regulatory bureau is that we want people to catch fish. Mm-hmm. We want people to be happy. We want people to go out and have fun and say, hey, we went out and we got all these fish. We made some great memories. My kids had a great time. We want that. We're not trying to make a situation where people are having a more difficult time.
Right. It's not the restrictor plate on the race car. It is what you're doing is it's strictly to manage the population of the game fish,
right,
to be as good as it can possibly be for the longest it can possibly be, so that the most people possible can catch fish and enjoy it. That's really what it's about. Isn't it?
That's what it comes down to. It's always fun to, maybe have a short period of success or some really big fish for 5 years. But, we're looking at this kind of long term that, we want to catch a few big fish for us, but we want our kids to be able to catch big fish. We want their kids to be able to catch big fish. So we're looking at a scale of, decades versus, just a handful of years. So, we want things to be stable over, periods of time, and not just kind of a flash in the pan.
Yeah. I'm now jumping back over to the Oxbows. As
Sure.
you were talking, some of them are not completely landlocked and cut off from the river. Some still connected, like Ferguson,
Correct.
I think.
Yeah. Ferguson, Lake Washington, Whittington, places like that. They have either navigation channels or, waterways that connect them directly to the Mississippi River. And, that poses some challenges for us from a management perspective. Because if you think of, a landlocked lake or a reservoir, it has defined edges or sides, right? And if you have something like a river, well, you have this kind of open connection that brings all kinds of things with it. So it brings water, it brings fish, it can bring nutrients, it can bring sediment. And those are all challenges for us as a fisheries bureau. So as you may imagine, in like a reservoir, we can kind of control and use traditional tools or methods to combat some of the difficulties that we have. But we can put out structure for fish, or we can stock a lake with fish. And if that river has a different idea and that water comes up, that can pull all of those fish out of there. It can fill it with a foot of mud. It's really makes it more challenging for us compared to a more inland lake.
Sure.
Yeah.
This may also be a dumb question, one of many from me. Just appreciate you hanging in there. But
No.
I was thinking, recently about that, like the Catfish tournament that came to Vicksburg last year, maybe last. I know it's coming back this summer.
Yeah.
And seeing those guys weighing in those big 60 and 70 pound blue cats that they're catching in those tournaments. And do those size catfish, I wonder, purely because of proximity, say Ferguson, somewhere like that, you've got an inlet outlet, from the river. Are those fish sometimes coming out of the river into Lake Ferguson and back and forth, or are those big catfish kind of staying in that current in the river? I'm curious about the use of that from a fish standpoint.
Yeah. So, they definitely migrate to some extent, probably more juvenile or kind of subadult type fish.
Okay.
Will spend time in, shallower, kind of smaller water bodies. Once those catfish get really, really big, they're pretty much sticking to the Mississippi River. They might move back and forth a little bit, but you think of a fish that size, it needs a big food source, it's going to, stick in areas where it can find, move more food for itself. But we used to do some tagging work on catfish in the Mississippi River. I know, our current bureau director, Jerry Brown, he did some tagging work on catfish. Flatheads, I think he did a lot of work on. Perhaps some blues. I'm not too sure about that, but there's interest in big catfish and things, and the tournaments on the river, and trying to get ideas of how many big fish are out there, are their population stable, and we still do some tagging every year with some catfish guides on the Mississippi River, and it's just another project that we're trying to find the time to really get our hands on. So,
yeah, and I've wondered, is it myth or is it busted? That I've heard over the years. I bet there's catfish in that river that are as big as Volkswagens.
Yeah,
Yay, nay?
Fish stories.
That's what I'm saying.
There's definitely some big catfish out there, but I don't think they're the size of Volkswagens. To get a blue cat close to 100 pounds is not uncommon.
Right.
They're out there. You can get big flatheads, 60, 70 pounds. It's, fishing stories, right? So, or you have a little kid or something say, oh, I caught this fish the size of a car. And
he broke my line.
Maybe it wasn't quite the size of a car, but it was a big fish.
Yeah. That's right. Well, it's really interesting to get to talk to you. Every time, whether it's been Jerry or Larry, and now getting to meet you and talk with you, from I don't know, my mind just kind of spins thinking about, okay, fisheries management, game fish population management, and just what a big operation that has to be in the state of Mississippi, and how wide ranging from Oxbows to the coast, maybe brackish water to, like Pickwick in North Mississippi. It's fascinating to me that you and your team deal with all of that on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. I mean, we have a really great team of, people that work for MDWFP. And like you're saying, the coast of the state is extremely different from the northern part of the state. We have, southern walleye in some places of northern Mississippi. In the wintertime, there's some places where we'll put out, some rainbow trout for people to catch, and a couple little fishing ponds. And then down on the coast, it never really cools off that much. And like you're saying, it's warm pretty much all the time. And sometimes you have brackish water, you've depending upon, what's going on with the weather and things like that. It's a whole different ball game. So we really have to have, kind of different teams or subsets of biologists that are really good at what they do in their region, to take care of the state. And talking about the Delta and Oxbows, talk about another unique landscape. So for anybody who's been to the Delta, or, lived there, grew up, and, just kind of that part of the country, that part of the state is really unique, and just in terms of, the amount of agriculture that goes on over there, and the connection that people have to the land and to the to the water and fishing and all those kinds of things. It's very unique. Yeah.
Well, personally, as someone who has tried to catch a lot of fish a lot of time, I've caught a few, but not nearly as many as I want to. I do appreciate the job that you do, the fisheries that we have. I live in Tupelo, and for someone who likes to fish, what a wonderful place to live, not only Tupelo, but the state of Mississippi. And so on behalf of those of us that are trying to catch fish and sometimes catching them, really do appreciate the job that you do and the work that you and your team do.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I think I can speak for most people and say that, we really love what we do. Everybody that I work with and, interact with, that we've been, fish people almost our whole lives, whether it's been recreationally or from more of an academic standpoint. At some level, we just all love fish. We're fascinated by them. We want to learn more about them every day, every week, every year. And we're always trying to, kind of improve things the best we can. So we're always, kind of learning year to year and kind of see what works and what doesn't work. And again, to kind of reiterate the point that, we want Mississippians and people from all across the country, maybe other countries, to come here and say, hey, Mississippi is a great place to fish. There's so many outdoor opportunities. And, we've started to make that mark a little bit with our crappie fishing. Some of the top 3-4, crappie destinations in the world are right here in Mississippi, which is, pretty cool thing. So I'll be honest, growing up in Ohio, I didn't really do a lot of crappie fishing in Ohio, but coming down here to the South and in Mississippi, I quickly learned, how big of a deal it is, and how much a tradition and a culture it is, for people to want to get out and, enjoy our natural resources.
Yeah. Greg, thanks so much for being here. It's been fun.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you. Yeah. He is Greg Glotzbecker, the Fisheries Coordinator here at MDWFP. Appreciate you listening, and we'll see you outdoors.